Right, welcome to this video. No colour, no texture, just good old plain turning. A piece of yew I've had for, well, must be 8 years or more, so it's pretty dry, pretty hard. Got it on screw chuck and just truing up the front face using my largest bowl gouge for some reason. Just doing push cuts, letting the bevel glide across the face, working towards the centre. I did chainsaw this from a larger lump, but rather inexpertly, shall we say. So it was a little bit rough and ready. And you can see a little bit of ghosting on the outside edge there. There's a bit of bark that came off. So it's not completely round either. And a little focusing issue, but there we go. You can see a few tool marks there. They obviously will go once the surface is smoother and as more cuts are made and everything gets into the same plane. Always slow down when you're getting towards the centre. Just looking to see if I've got it the right size for a tenon. It's a touch on the small side, so I'll correct that a little later on. And there you can see the sapwood and the rather straight line there where a little piece of bark was that's come off, but that would be turned away in the shaping. Once I trued the face up, I wanted to true the edge up, partly because this was so out of round, and being an old dry piece it would cut much better if I can turn at a faster speed, so I wanted to get it into balance as soon as possible. So again, out of the shot you can't see that I'm moving my whole body for this shot. I find that if you move your whole body, you've got much more control of the tool, especially when you're coming off that back end of it. If you just do that with your arms, sliding your arms along in front of your body, you haven't got the same sort of mass behind you to stop yourself skidding off the back of the bowl blank. So a little bit more needed just to bring it down to round, to cut through that missing bit of bark. And this is a nice shot to show again how this cut is made with the bevel gliding, riding, not rubbing, across the edge. And the thing that is so beautiful about yew is that lovely rich caramelly brown colour. So many different shades of brown in there, and the grain of course is often quite spectacular. So to get the curve done, a little skip there, did you see? I'm just knocking the corner off, and then once that's done I'll start practicing my shaping. So you can see from above it's not a curve yet, because I was just sliding my body from left to right. Now you can see a curve starting to come with this push cut. Probably I could open the flute a little more, but that's coming with a swing of the hips. Swinging the left hip forward as you swing around, keeping the bevel gliding on the wood. You can get quite some way over the tool rest with a push cut, a bit more than with a pull cut, but just to maintain tool control, do take the effort and time to stop your lathe and adjust your tool rest so that you've got as much support as possible when you're making the cuts. Production turners are a law unto themselves, that of course, and they've got many thousands of hours and thousands of bowls behind them. So from the top you can see that shape is appearing. I've got the gouge over at about 10 o'clock. Again, once I've got that cut established, it is possible to open that flute up a little more. You can do that with a bowl gouge because of the sort of steep sides of the bevel. You'll find it a very different matter if you try it with a spindle gouge. So I've got a nice circular shape, a nice curve, a single curve. It's got a few tool lines in it. Some of that is the hardness of the yew that's being cut. Some of it is the skipping that's introduced by cutting through the denser heartwood and then the very easily cut sap. And there I am, just making myself a slightly larger tenon. I got a little bit carried away with myself when I made it first of all, and it perhaps it would have gone in the chuck, but better to be certain that it will. So slightly bigger tenon going on, and that tenon will be hollowed slightly, and the edge will be turned off it when we get to the end of the project. So it doesn't have to be very deep. I think it's probably about 3 or 4 millimeters deep. And now that's established, I can work my curve. I want the curve to go all the way round into the foot. Now I was under the impression that for that tenon to work, it really needed a flat on the wood around it, and I do end up with a small flat. But I remember watching a Richard Raffin video some time ago where he, if I remember correctly, said that you don't need to have a flat around the foot on side grain. If I've misremembered that, my apologies. So doing a little bit more of a shear cut now. You can see I'm using the left hand wing, the handle is down low, and this is a cut that I've found beginners try to copy it, but don't always get the bevel in contact, and then you're either scraping and you get away with it, or if you have too much of the edge exposed and you catch the wood across that edge, you get a very, very, very nasty dig in. Makes a very loud noise, and by the time the tool's finished digging in, the wood has probably turned round several times, and you end up with a great big chunks missing from the edge of your wood. So if you're going to use this cut, then you've got to have your bevel rubbing, gliding, skating, skimming across the surface, or you've got to have your flute completely closed, so that you can make a scraping cut or a scraping scrape. I decided I wanted a little bit of interest on the upper part of the bowl, so I'm going to put a little step there, just working out the proportions, stopping to keep checking how the wood's cutting, making sure that the shape is right, changing to a slightly smaller gouge now. And I can get in a little closer to the foot there and take a finer cut, partly because the larger gouge was probably getting a little bit blunt. So this push cut, this is the one to practice. I think this often leaves a better surface, but it does require a lot more control of your tool presentation and of the speed, the feed speed. You really can very easily introduce lots of little ridges in your work if you're not practiced in this cut, which is generally why I tend to use the pull cut. I find that, having mastered where you've got to put the bevel, I find that an easier one to master. So you can see a lot of the lines have gone. There's a couple around the foot I can see at the sort of just above the flat around the foot, but most of the tool lines have gone. Now, it's just so I can see where I'm aiming for, I'm just cleaning up and leveling the outer part of the top face. It's a useful thing to do because you can get a very false impression of how thick your rim is going to end up being, or how tall your bowl is going to end up being if you leave that top face uneven. So the flare on that rim was just a little bit too large, so just trim that back a little. Oh, camera's going to come into action soon. There we go, wake up. So yeah, we can see there is still evidence of a few little lines, particularly round the foot, where it's harder to get the bevel to engage because the foot's in the way when you're doing a push cut. You've got the option of doing a push cut the wrong way, going from larger to small, and that often will work. Or you have the option of using a scraper. Now, you either are a scraper user or you're not a scraper user, I guess. There are some people that wouldn't pick one up. I don't turn enough bowls to make not using a scraper particularly viable for myself. I see it as a refining tool, and you can see how that has done a great job of balancing out the cut, removing those tool marks and blending it into one complete surface. The structure of that complete surface was already there. It's just little bounces of the gouge that have left those rings that need to be turned away. And for me, the scraping is barely touching the wood. I don't want any weight going into the wood. The scraper is there just to refine and take very, very light cuts. I think it's a perfectly legitimate tool to have in your turner's armoury. So what's left there is a much cleaner, clearer surface. Look at all the lovely variation of colour and the strength of grain. And don't rush it. The other thing that I find a scraper useful for is removing the invisible bumps that I can't see but can feel with my fingers. You can do that with a gouge. If you get proficient at it, you can do that shear scraping with a gouge. I just find the extra weight of the scraper stabilizes the cut, and I do it better with a scraper. You may find otherwise. And I like doing this project. I like to every so often doing just a very simple project, just turning a bowl, turning a shape, making a box, not thinking about decorating it in any way, and really what kind of decoration would make this piece of yew more interesting. Well, I think if you sprayed it with ebonising lacquer, you could put some lovely colour over the top, but you might as well do that on a much plainer wood. This is going to have a lot of warmth and character in the grain and in its natural colouring. So I think that's what needs to be on show. Okay, got a very nice surface there. That's a surface I can start sanding with 120 grit. You can see the difference in finish on the curve of the bowl compared to the foot. I will turn a little bit more of that, get that a slightly nicer surface, but that's going to be turned again anyway. Once we've hollowed out the bowl, then I'll reverse chuck it in my wooden plate jaws and tidy it up, but we'll get to that in the fullness of time. So there we go, there's my 240 pad going into the drill. Dust extraction's on. I'm wearing a face mask which you can't see, and I'm wearing a dust mask. So keep the pad moving, keep the drill moving, follow the shape of the curve. Careful not to catch the edges of the tenon and put a slope on them which won't grip in the chuck, and just work through the grits. For the beech and sycamore that I turn, I normally stop at about 240 because I'm going to use colour or an abrasive paste on it. The finish I'm going to use with this bowl is just going to be oil. So I'm going to go through from 240, 320 and 400. I don't think the naked eye, human eye, is going to see much more improvement if I go beyond the 400, but go to 600 if you want to. So the separate elements, when you're sanding, it's important to sand them separately. So you saw me just sanding the sort of wide band at the top of the bowl, and then returning and treating the curve of the bowl as a separate piece. If you don't do that, you'll end up rounding over or blending your edges together and losing the crispness. You do want them to have a soft edge, though it's not hard to hand, but or feel sharp in your fingers, but I definitely don't want to lose the definition between the two parts. And don't rush the sanding. The The first grit is the one that you spend the longest on. It's the one that's refining, smoothing the surface, removing your tool marks, gouge marks. It's fine for removing those features. It's not fine for removing things like torn grain. Tear out is something that needs to be cut away. If you sand it away, it'll take you a very long time and you'll get a very compromised shape. What I like about you, if you look from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock, that lovely little deviation in the grain direction, that's what makes, one of the features anyway, that makes you so interesting. So this is now, I think, the 320 grit, possibly 400. I haven't been paying attention. I've been mesmerised by what I'm seeing as I record the voiceover. Getting round to that transition point. Now you can see a little line of white at that transition point. That's because it's very hard to, when you're sanding in this way, to get right into that point. But I'm going to use that as a little punctuation line and actually put a burn line in there. The only decoration I'm allowing myself, 1 or 2 burn lines, and I burn them with a piece of Formica with the lathe spinning relatively fast. So that surface, you can see a little bit of a shine just from the sanding, and it does feel very soft and smooth in the hand. Right, so sanding done. Let's get the extractor off. I must work out a way of doing that remotely. Trickier with an NVR switch though. And here's a rather blunt point tool, as I discovered later on with another cut, but just making a very fine cut there to get the bit of Formica in. And need it spinning relatively fast, around about 1000. Get a fresh bit of Formica in there. You can see it burns almost immediately, and that's a very nice sort of punctuation mark between the two. Complements the strong grain of the yew. I think probably black is a well, we can argue whether it's a colour. Best paint to use to add some accent to a piece of yew. And there we go. Herculean efforts to get it off the screw chuck, and some reason I'd managed to loosen the screw chuck at some point. Luckily, it didn't affect the cutting of the bowl. So just a case of removing that screw chuck, and then I can grip the bowl on that tenon. It's good practice to make your tenon almost the exact size at when the jaws form a circle, which for this Supernova 2 or Record Power or Sorby chuck with their 50mm jaws on is about 46 millimeters. So from above you can see the bottom curve works nicely as a complete curve right from the foot, but I'm not sure about the top band. It might flare out a little too much. So truing up the face, we've already trued the edge up here, but just get the bevel on and glide across, and there you see that little skip in the center. Even though it looks like that screw hole is pretty centered, it's got a tiny wobble you can see in there, and it's generally best to just stop a little bit short of that, or to go through it very slowly. Right, no standing on ceremony, let's get hollowing. So swinging the handle right to left, bevel over, there's a catch. That's me not lifting the handle. So I get the tip close to the wood and then get a smoother entry by lifting the back hand and moving the tool forwards and round. So the curve again is made with your body. You can see me swinging out of shot there, swinging the gouge round as I swing my hips round. And that swing, you can tell I'm using a swing rather than sort of shaping it with the tool because of where the tool handle ends up far round to the right. You can start with your gouge sort of handle not at such an angle, but then you're sort of pushing it forward into the cut. I don't think you get as nice a curve. I didn't want the rim to be completely flat, so just introducing a little curve there. And now I'd work on establishing the final thickness. And one thing I want to try to do is to have a little undercut in that rim. I don't want the bowl to the opening of the bowl to flare outwards. Quite difficult to scoop things out of a bowl if you have that shape on the inside. If you have a little undercut, as you pull things out, when they hit the rim, they fall back into your hands. That's a nice little feature. So I'm going in with a smaller gouge and a bit of vibration, a bit of a screech, but you can see there I'm cutting slightly wider just below the rim and then swinging round. It'll also give a strong shadow line, which is quite a nice feature. So let's see if you can see I'm a little bit, body's a little bit in the way. I get the cut in, hold it before I start swinging, and then swing round. And you know you're cutting well when you get lovely shavings coming off like that. I'm keeping the centre in just as a way of keeping some mass in there and to help keep the integrity of the wood, although it is really quite dry. So the chances of it warping and moving in the turning time is quite slight. So I need to get to the final depth now. Just a few nibbling cuts, just reducing, clearing the waste out. And let's have a look, and let's get the finger calipers in action. There we go. This was one of those projects I sort of did on a whim, really. I'd finished in the day for the day. I thought, oh, should I just make a little bowl? I'd cleaned everything up, of course, beforehand, so I had to do another vacuum of all the shavings. So you can see there I'm coming in at slightly above centre and then dropping down to centre. It's quite slight, some of it's quite level. Yeah, that was a bit more level. Sometimes you'll find that if the bevel isn't allowing you to make the curve, that if you drop your handle and go above centre as you're swinging in, then you'll get more bevel contact. So we can see in there a few little bounce lines, a few little bruising lines from the bevel. And getting the pip out, try not to push through it, very slow, just hold your gouge there, almost like it's being removed like that, falls into the flute. Still not perfect, you can see there's a slight divot, but I think I can probably take a little bit more off. That's my rather crude depth gauge. Putting a finger in and eyeballing how much of the finger goes in. And it's really important that the curve in this bowl runs from the rim all the way down to that point in the middle. That way the light falling on the surface will show it as an uninterrupted curve. You won't get a shadow line or a highlight line where the light hits a corner. That, I think, looks much more pleasing and inviting than a bowl that's curved on the sides and then flat along the bottom. You'll get a very distinct transition mark that the light will show. The sound of sharpening. So this gouge I'm using, was actually a large skew chisel when I first purchased it second hand, but I use it as a gouge with quite a steep quite a steep bevel, a lot steeper than quite a lot of turners might use. It's probably something like about 78 degrees, 80 degrees, which is quite a lot more obtuse. I think a lot of turners use 60 or even 45 degrees. But this is what I'm used to using, and this is what I use. So I've shaped my scraper so that I can use the left-hand side of it for interior curves, and the right-hand side of it I can use for going up right up to a foot. So it's got a straight for about 1 centimetre and then a curve. Now that squeaking noise was vibration, and you want to try to avoid that squeaking noise. You can support the bowl with your hand on the outside. Now this is being scraped immediately after I've turned it, and there is some risk in scraping all the way round the inside of the curve inside grain, as I discovered when I turned an elm bowl very early on in my turning career and left it overnight and then came to scrape it, and it had moved, of course, and I got a very unnerving catch in the distorted side wall. So only do this if you know your shape is true and hasn't warped or moved, and it's not going to move, and don't do it to a piece that you turned the previous day. The gouge is the safest way to shape that upper wall. The scraper's fine along the side grain at the bottom. So for this I started the sanding of grit back from the outside. Went with 180 grit, but then worked my way through from the 180 up to 400 again. And there are some tips to have in mind when you're sanding the inside of a bowl. Keep your pad moving, and don't sand too long around the middle, around the centre of your bowl, around that point. If you do, you can introduce a bit of a lump and a bit of a hollow. So light pressure on the wood, work through the middle rather than hovering around the edge of it. And don't forget to do the rim. And again, you can see I'm doing that as a separate surface. I'm not moving from the inside of the bowl onto the rim and just sanding straight across it. I'm lifting the sandpaper off, lifting the disc off, and then applying it to the rim. That way you'll keep the definition that you've cut into them. But like I say earlier, you want to soften the very sharp edge, but you don't want to blend those two surfaces together. They need to be separate, distinct surfaces, I think. So there was the 180 done, 240 is done, and we move on to 320. So again, getting the rim done, you can see the dust extractor taking away a lot of the dust. It's a 2 horsepower one. I've upped my game from a vacuum style one to an impeller with a fine filter on. It just moves much more air. I find it's much more successful at capturing more of the sanding dust. So if you're having difficulty using a vacuum to collect your sanding dust, one of these impeller types, as long as it's either vented outside or running through a fine filter, is a good bit of kit to have. But it doesn't replace the need to have a dust mask on. And also running in the background, I've got a workshop air filter. Right, just wipe out the dust. It's always good to remove the dust between grits. There were some little knots inside which I've left. So I know some people might fill them. I've just left them as a natural feature inside the bowl. Just bringing the speed down a little. I find it better to reduce the speed when I'm using the finer grit so that there's less chance of me introducing some heat checks in with the sanding. Again, keep the pad moving. Run through the centre, don't dwell in it. And when you work through the grits and sanded, it already starts to get a very, very pleasing shine. It's a lovely warm look to it. So I've tried to keep the editing of this to as a minimum, just to sort of show as much of the process in real time. I think it's very easy to get an idea that you can turn a bowl in 5 minutes from watching some videos, or that the sanding really only takes 2 or 3 minutes. Moving through the centre and out again. It's very important not just to clean the dust, but to feel the shape. Make sure that you haven't introduced any bumps inadvertently, and that you're happy with the surface. So that's the inside done, the back is done. Now we just need to get the foot turned. And if you've been following my Facebook posts the last couple of weeks, you'll have seen my mega wooden jaws. So these are made from a piece of, I think it might be Douglas fir, rather large lumps of it on some 150mm plate jaws from Axminster, and it just so happens there's a hole cut in there that is almost exactly the right size for my little simple U-bowl to go into. I don't even need to cut a new channel for them. So they're very easy to use. Of the remount choices I've got available to me, and I've got cold jaws, I've got a Longworth chuck, I actually find these wooden jaws centre it the best and hold it the best. With cold jaws and with the Longworth chuck, the buttons have a bit of give in them. It's more difficult to get it trued up, I think, and centred. You can help yourself by leaving a little button on the bottom with the centre mark in and holding it on your Longworth or cold jaws with the tailstock with a live centre in there, holding it in position. But there you go, it's in my wood jaws, and that is running completely true. Well worth making. I've been meaning to make these thicker ones for about 5 years, so I'm glad I finally got round to it. So the only bit that needs turning is the foot and the tenon, I should say. That right-handed angle at the outside edge, I'm going to put a little slope on there, just using a small bowl gouge. You can use a spindle gouge for this. That's absolutely fine to use a spindle gouge, not a spindle roughing gouge though. I think we're all aware of that. And I want to put a little line in there as the edge of that, and mark it with some Formica as well to echo what's going on at the top of the bowl. So for it to sit on the outside of that, what is now a foot, now we've reshaped the tenon, I do a little undercut. Oh, I must have managed to edit a little bit of that turning out. Anyway, there's some sanding done, and just checking it with my finger, making sure it's smooth, it hasn't got a bump in it. Quite a lot of things I've taken off the lathe and found, oh, there's a bump there that I hadn't seen and I hadn't paid enough attention with my fingertips. So give it a good feel. Don't even look at it while you're feeling it, just to make sure you haven't missed anything. So there we have it, a simple little bowl in U. Bit of an experiment for me, because the last time I turned this I felt a bit ill afterwards. So let's see how I feel this evening. Pretty even wall thickness running all the way round, maybe a little thinner at the bottom because of that little indent in the foot. I'd like the foot to sit out a little prouder than it does. But it's such a beautiful warm wood. All it needs now is a bit of finish. Ebonizing lacquer and iridescent paint, anyone? I'm running just an oil finish for this one. Just wipe off the excess, leave it overnight, and another coat in the morning, and maybe another coat tomorrow evening.